Part 1. The rain lashed against the reinforced glass of the delivery room, drowning out the hum of the ventilation system, but it could not drown out the terrifying silence where a baby's cry should have been. Dr. Evans stood between the mother and the bassinet, his face the color of ash, and his voice trembled as he gave the order. "Do not look down, Juliana. Do not." The fluorescent lights of the obstetrics ward at County General hummed with that low, headache-inducing frequency that seemed to burrow into the temples of everyone working the night shift. It was 3 in the morning, the kind of hour where the air feels thick with exhaustion, and the smell of antiseptic cleaner becomes cloying, sticking to the back of the throat like a bad memory. Outside, the West Texas wind was howling across the plains, rattling the window panes of the old brick building. But inside room 304, time had seemingly frozen. The floor tiles, worn down by decades of pacing fathers and rushing nurses, gleamed under the harsh, artificial light. Juliana lay on the delivery bed, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her chest heaving with the exertion of the last 12 hours. The labor had been long, a marathon of pain and anticipation that had stripped her defenses down to the raw nerve. She was 26 years old, with the calloused hands of someone who worked the land and the soft eyes of someone who had dreamed of this moment since she was a little girl. She had painted the nursery yellow. She had folded the tiny onesies. She had prepared for everything, or so she thought. But she had not prepared for the look she now saw in Dr. Evans's eyes. Dr. Evans was a man of few words, a veteran obstetrician who had delivered half the town's population. He had seen breaches, cords wrapped around necks, and hemorrhages that turned sheets crimson, all without losing his composure. He was the kind of doctor who offered a steady hand and a reassuring nod. A man who smelled of peppermint and starch. But right now, his hands were shaking inside his latex gloves. He wasn't looking at Juliana. He was looking at the nurses, Martha and Sarah, with an expression that screamed of urgent, silent desperation. If you find yourself drawn to stories that explore the deepest corners of the human heart and the medical mysteries that challenge our understanding of life, please take a moment to follow our page for more daily narratives. "Why isn't he crying?" Juliana asked, her voice raspy, barely a whisper over the sound of the rain battering the hospital. The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. In the movies, the baby always cries. It is the sound of life, the lung-clearing wail that signals the end of danger. But here, there was only the wet sound of instruments being placed on metal trays and the shuffling of rubber-soled shoes. "Get the sedative," Dr. Evans murmured to Nurse Martha, his voice low, trying to keep the words from reaching the mother's ears. "Now, 2 milligrams of Versed. She needs to sleep." "No," Juliana said, pushing herself up on her elbows, ignoring the screaming ache in her lower body. The instinct that surged through her was ancient, primal. It was the fierce, protective heat of a mother wolf sensing a threat to her cub. "I don't want to sleep. Where is my son? Dr. Evans, why isn't he crying?" The pregnancy had been textbook in every way that mattered on paper. Her blood pressure was perfect, her weight gain was steady. But there had been that one lingering oddity, a detail that had been dismissed as shyness or bad luck. During every ultrasound, from the 12-week scan to the final checkup, the baby had been turned away, hiding, his face pressed against the uterine wall, or obscured by his hands, or shadowed by the umbilical cord. "He's just playing hide and seek," the technician had joked 3 months ago. Juliana had laughed then. She wasn't laughing now. Nurse Martha, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair who had held Juliana's hand through the worst of the contractions, hesitated. She looked at the doctor, then at the bundled form in the warming bassinet across the room. She looked like she was about to be sick. Tears were welling in her eyes, not of joy, but of a profound, shattering pity. She moved toward the IV line in Juliana's arm, the syringe in her hand. "It's for the best, honey," Martha said, her voice cracking. "You need to rest. There are complications, respiratory issues. We need to stabilize him." "Don't touch me!" Juliana ripped her arm away, the IV stand rattling dangerously. The adrenaline flooding her system was potent enough to mask the pain, potent enough to clear the fog of exhaustion. She saw the way they were standing. They were forming a wall, a human barricade between her and the corner of the room where the incubator hummed. They weren't treating a respiratory issue. If it were just breathing, they would be rushing, shouting codes, bagging the infant. They were moving with a slow, mournful solemnity. They were mourning. "Juliana, please." Dr. Evans stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder, trying to gently push her back against the pillows. His touch was cold. "You have been through a traumatic birth. The baby has severe anomalies. We are assessing the viability. Seeing him right now, it would be too much for you. Trust me, I am trying to protect you." "Protect me from my own son?" Juliana's voice rose, shrill and breaking. The fear was a cold stone in her stomach. What could be so wrong? Was he stillborn? No, she had seen the chest move. She had seen the small limbs twitch. He was alive. He was there. And he was alone in that plastic box, while these people stared at him like he was a secret that needed to be buried. The room felt suddenly too small, the walls closing in. The smell of iodine seemed to sharpen. Stinging her nose, she looked at the doctor, really looked at him, and saw a man who was terrified, not of the medical procedure, but of the emotional crater that was about to open up in this room. He was trying to spare her a memory that would haunt her forever. He was trying to be kind in the only way he knew how, by delay, by sedation, by erasure. But love does not want to be spared. Love wants the truth, no matter how jagged the edges are. "Move," Juliana said. It wasn't a request. "Juliana, you can't get up. You're bleeding," Nurse Sarah warned, stepping forward. "I said move." Juliana swung her legs over the side of the bed. The pain was blinding, a white-hot flash that tore through her pelvis, but she gritted her teeth and planted her bare feet on the cold linoleum. The hospital gown hung loosely around her, stained and crumpled. She felt lightheaded, the room swaying like a ship in a storm, but her eyes were locked on that bassinet. The staff seemed paralyzed by her defiance. In this small rural hospital, patients listened to doctors. They did what they were told. They took the pill, they signed the form, they looked away when instructed. But Juliana was running on a fuel that burned hotter than compliance. She was a mother who had not yet met her child, and the silence from that corner was pulling her like a magnet. She took one step, then another. Her legs trembled violently. A trail of blood droplets marked her path on the floor, stark red against the beige tiles. Dr. Evans raised his hands as if to physically restrain her, then dropped them, realizing the futility. He couldn't tackle a woman who had just given birth. He could only watch the tragedy unfold. He closed his eyes for a brief second, a silent prayer moving his lips. Juliana reached the incubator. The machine was humming softly, a cruel mechanical lullaby. A white sheet had been draped loosely over the top, shielding the contents from view. A shroud for the living. Her hand shook as she reached out. Her fingers brushed the warm plastic. "Don't do it, Juliana," Dr. Evans whispered from behind her. His voice was filled with a profound sorrow. "Once you see, you can't unsee." She didn't listen. She couldn't. The bond was already there, forged in 9 months of heartbeats and kicks. Whatever was under that sheet was half of her. It was the future she had dreamed of. She gripped the edge of the white cloth. The rain hammered harder against the glass, a crescendo of nature's fury matching the pounding of her own heart. She took a breath that tasted of fear and sterile air. She pulled the sheet back. Part 2. The sheet fluttered to the floor, landing with a soft whisper that sounded like a shout in the breathless room. Juliana stared. She blinked once, twice, waiting for her eyes to adjust, waiting for the image to resolve into something that made sense, something that fit the geometry of the human face. Her brain scrambled to categorize what she was seeing, firing synapses in a desperate attempt to find a pattern. Eyes, nose, mouth, the holy trinity of recognition. But there was nothing. Where the face of her son should have been, there was only a smooth, unbroken expanse of pale skin. It was perfect in its terrible wrongness, unblemished, like a stone polished by centuries of river water, or a doll that the maker had forgotten to finish. There were no sockets, no nasal bridge, just a faint, shallow indentation where a mouth might have formed, a small slit that gasped for air that wouldn't come easily. It was an image that defied biology, a genetic, typographical error so severe it felt almost sacred in its cruelty. The scream that had been building in Juliana's chest didn't come out as a sound. It imploded. It collapsed inward, stealing the air from her lungs, turning her blood to ice. Her knees gave way. The strength vanishing from her legs, as if the cords of her muscles had been severed. Dr. Evans was there. He caught her before she hit the hard linoleum, his arms hooking under hers, taking her weight. He didn't speak. There was nothing to say. He just held her up, a pillar of weary support in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. What is it? Juliana choked out, the words scraping her throat. She was hanging in the doctor's arms, her eyes wide and fixed on the bassinet, unable to look away. Is he wearing a mask? No, Juliana, Dr. Evans said, his voice heavy with a fatigue that went beyond the physical. He guided her gently, trying to turn her away, but she resisted, her feet sliding on the floor. It is called severe anophthalmia, combined with facial fusion. It's a midline defect, a failure of the embryonic development in the first trimester. It is incredibly rare. The nurses, Martha and Sarah, stood by the wall, their hands clasped over their mouths. Martha was weeping silently, tears tracking through the powder on her cheeks. They had seen death before. They had seen stillbirths and deformities. But this was different. This was a total erasure of identity. A face is how we say, "I am here." This child had been denied the ability to be seen, even as he lay there, exposed under the heat lamps. The silence in the room was no longer empty. It was heavy, pressing against the eardrums. The only sound was the shallow, wet struggle of the baby trying to breathe through malformed passages, a sound that was heartbreakingly human despite his appearance. Juliana pulled herself free from Dr. Evans's grip. She gripped the side of the plastic bassinet, her knuckles white. She looked down at the child. Her mind was a storm of horror and confusion, a rejection of reality. This can't be mine. This is a nightmare. I am going to wake up in the recovery room, and he will be crying, and he will have his father's nose. But then the baby moved. It was a small movement. His hand, tiny and perfect, with 5 delicate fingers and fingernails like miniature pearls, reached up. He was grasping at the air, searching for something to hold, something to anchor him in this cold, bright, noisy world. The hand brushed against his own face, finding no eyes to rub, no mouth to suckle. That gesture, that universal, instinctive search for comfort, shattered Juliana's horror. The monster vanished. The medical anomaly vanished. In its place, she saw only vulnerability. She saw a terrified soul trapped in a body that didn't work, a baby who was cold and alone and had spent his first minutes of life being looked at with fear instead of love. "He's scared," Juliana whispered. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. "He doesn't know he looks like that. He just knows he's cold." "Juliana," Dr. Evans warned softly, stepping closer. "His condition, it is incompatible with life. The brain structure is likely compromised. The airways are insufficient. He doesn't have much time." "Then why is he in this box?" Juliana snapped, turning her head to glare at the doctor. Her eyes were fierce, blazing through the tears. "If he doesn't have time, why is he alone in a plastic box?" She didn't wait for an answer. Ignoring the IV line tugging at her vein, ignoring the blood that still stained her legs, she reached into the incubator. "Wait, the wires!" Nurse Sarah started to intervene, but Martha put a hand on her arm, stopping her. Martha shook her head slowly. "Let her," the gesture said. "Let her be a mother." Juliana's hands were trembling as she slid them under the small, warm body. She expected him to feel different, alien, but he felt exactly like a newborn baby. He was warm. His skin was soft as velvet. He weighed almost nothing, a featherweight burden of tragedy. She carefully maneuvered him around the sensors and tubes, lifting him up against her chest. The moment his skin touched hers, the room seemed to exhale. The baby's erratic movements settled. He curled into her warmth, sensing the familiar rhythm of her heartbeat, the sound he had listened to for 9 months. It was the only world he knew. He didn't need eyes to know he was home. Juliana sat down on the edge of the delivery bed, cradling him. She looked down at the smooth, blank canvas of his face. She didn't flinch this time. She traced the curve of his skull with her thumb. She touched the small, perfect ear. "I'm here," she whispered into the silence. "Mama is here. I see you. I see you." Dr. Evans watched from the foot of the bed, his shoulders slumping. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He had been so afraid of the horror, of the lawsuit, of the trauma. He had forgotten the sheer, illogical power of the maternal instinct. He had tried to treat the patient, but Juliana was treating the son. "Is he in pain?" she asked, not looking up. "We don't think so," Dr. Evans said quietly. "His neurological function is limited. He is likely fading. The oxygen levels are dropping." Juliana nodded slowly. She unwrapped the hospital blanket she had been given and draped it over him, leaving only his head exposed. She kissed the top of his head. It smelled of birth and iron. "You wanted to hide him," she said, her voice devoid of anger now, filled only with a deep, resonant sadness. "You thought I would hate him. I thought it would break you," Dr. Evans admitted. The rain outside had softened to a steady, rhythmic drumming, a funeral march played by the sky. "It did," Juliana said, rocking gently back and forth. "But not because of how he looks. Because you took my time away. You stole the first 10 minutes. She looked down at the baby again. His chest was rising and falling with agonizing slowness. The struggle was ending. The energy required to keep that small heart beating was fading. "What is his name?" Nurse Martha asked from the shadows, her voice thick. "Gabriel," Juliana said instantly. "Because he is an angel who he just forgot his face in heaven, that's all." The baby let out a soft sigh, a tiny vibration against Juliana's ribs. The heart monitor, which they hadn't disconnected, began to slow its rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. The golden light of the room seemed to dim, focusing entirely on the mother and child. It was a tableau of sorrow, a pietà in a Texas hospital room. Juliana wasn't looking at a deformity anymore. She was memorizing the feel of his weight. She was memorizing the shape of his hands. She was loving him hard and fast, trying to compress a lifetime of affection into whatever minutes remained. Dr. Evans checked his watch, then looked at the monitor. The lines were spacing out. The end was coming, not with a bang, but with a quiet slipping away. "Juliana," he said softly. His heart. "I know," she whispered, pulling the bundle tighter. "I can feel it." She leaned down, placing her cheek against the smooth, featureless skin of his forehead. She closed her eyes, shutting out the hospital, the rain, the fear. In the darkness behind her eyelids, he was perfect. In the darkness, they were just a mother and son. "You can go," she told the baby, her tears finally falling, hot and fast, landing on his skin. "You can go, Gabriel. I love you. You are beautiful. You are so beautiful." The monitor gave a long, low warning tone, but no one moved to turn it off. Part 3. The long, singular tone of the heart monitor flatlining was a sound that usually triggered a flurry of organized chaos, the crash cart, the shouting of orders, the rhythmic compressions of CPR. But in room 304, it triggered only a deeper stillness. No one moved to silence the machine immediately. It hummed its electronic elegy, a final testament to a life that had burned for barely an hour. Juliana didn't look at the screen. She didn't need a machine to tell her that the small bird-like fluttering against her chest had ceased. She felt the exact moment Gabriel's spirit slipped from the room, leaving behind a body that was growing heavy and still. She held him for a long time after the sound began, rocking him with the same gentle rhythm, humming a lullaby that had no melody, just a vibration of grief. Nurse Martha finally stepped forward, her movements reverent, like a sacristan approaching an altar. She reached over and silenced the alarm. The sudden quiet was deafening. The rain had stopped. The wind had died down. The Texas night was holding its breath. "Time of death," Dr. Evans said, his voice cracking on the last word. He cleared his throat, trying to regain the professional detachment that had abandoned him hours ago. 4:12 a.m. Juliana didn't hand the baby over. Not yet. She unwrapped the blanket and looked at his hands one last time, counting the fingers again. 10. She looked at his feet. 10 toes. She touched the smooth skin where his eyes should have been, no longer seeing a defect, but a mercy. He had never had to see the world's cruelty. He had only known the warmth of her womb and the warmth of her arms. He had known only love. "He was warm," Juliana whispered, her voice sounding hollow, as if coming from a great distance. "He was warm the whole time." "Yes," Martha said softly, placing a hand on Juliana's shoulder. "He was loved the whole time." The next hour passed in a blur of necessary but painful rituals. The washing of the body, the footprints, ink pressed onto paper, preserving the only part of him that looked like everyone else. Juliana insisted on doing it herself. She washed him with a tenderness that made Dr. Evans look away, unable to bear the intimacy of her grief. She dressed him in the yellow onesie she had brought, the one with the little ducks, which now seemed agonizingly too big for his frail form. When the sun began to bleed through the blinds, painting stripes of dusty gold across the worn floor, the hospital chaplain arrived. He was a young man, new to the parish, and he looked terrified when he saw the baby. He faltered in the doorway, his Bible clutched to his chest like a shield. Juliana saw his hesitation. She saw the recoil, and for the first time since the birth, a spark of anger flared in her eyes, cold and hard. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice low but cutting through the room like a scalpel. "Don't you dare look away. He is not a mistake. He is my son." The chaplain swallowed hard, shamed by the fierce dignity of the woman sitting on the bed. He stepped forward, his face softening. He performed the baptism with trembling hands, sprinkling water on the smooth forehead. "Gabriel," he said, "servant of God." When they finally took him away, when the small bassinet was wheeled out of the room toward the morgue, Juliana didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She sat very still, staring at the empty space where he had been. The silence in the room had changed again. It wasn't the terrified silence of the birth, nor the heavy silence of death. It was the hollow, echoing silence of a house after the guests have left. Dr. Evans stayed behind after the nurses had cleared the instruments. He sat on the stool by the bed, looking older than he had at the start of the shift. He took off his glasses and cleaned them on his scrub top, a nervous tic he couldn't suppress. "Juliana," he started, struggling for the words, about earlier, trying to keep him from you." "You were wrong," she said, looking out the window at the flat, gray horizon of the Texas plains. "I know," he admitted. "I thought I was protecting you from a nightmare. In 30 years of medicine, I've seen things that break people. I thought the shock would be too much." "The shock was seeing him." Juliana turned to look at him. "The nightmare was you thinking I wouldn't love him because he was broken." Dr. Evans nodded, accepting the judgment. "I will carry that. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry for him," she said. "He was perfect. Be sorry that you doubted a mother." Weeks later, the legal paperwork would be filed. It wasn't a lawsuit for malpractice in the medical sense. The genetic defect was an act of nature, a tragic roll of the biological dice that no doctor could have predicted or prevented. The case study would eventually be published in medical journals, discussing the rarity of the condition, the severe midline fusion defects, and anophthalmia. Doctors would study Gabriel's short life in black and white text, analyzing the failure of cells to divide. But Juliana's lawsuit was different. It was a civil claim against the hospital administration for emotional distress caused by the denial of maternal contact. It wasn't about the money. It was about the protocol. It was about ensuring that no other mother in that county, in that state, would ever have a doctor decide for her whether her baby was too monstrous to be held. She won a settlement, but she didn't keep it. The money went to a foundation for families of children with rare craniofacial anomalies. She wanted his name to mean something other than tragedy. 6 months after that night, Juliana returned to the hospital, not as a patient, but to visit. She walked past the delivery rooms, down the hall that smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. She found Dr. Evans at the nurse's station. He looked up, surprised, a file halfway to his lips. She placed a small framed photograph on the counter. It wasn't a picture of the baby's face. She had never taken one, protecting his dignity even in death. It was a picture of her hand holding his tiny hand, the fingers interlaced, the connection visible. "I wanted you to have this," she said. Dr. Evans looked at the photo, then at her. His eyes were wet. "Why?" he asked. "So you remember," Juliana said, her voice steady and strong, healed by the fire she had walked through. "Medicine saves lives, doctor, but love is what makes them matter, even the ones that only last an hour." She turned and walked away, her boots clicking on the linoleum, walking out of the hospital and into the bright, blinding Texas sun. The automatic doors slid shut behind her with a finality that felt like closure. Inside, on the counter, the photograph remained, a small testament to a brief life that had changed everything, proving that you don't need eyes to be seen, and you don't need a future to leave a legacy.